How do Agile teams decide whether a user story should be estimated as 3 story points, 8 story points, or 13 story points? In this video, we're going to walk through how Agile teams estimate user stories and use velocity for planning and forecasting. We'll follow the actual workflow teams use in practice, from reviewing backlog items, estimating stories, selecting sprint work, calculating velocity, and then using that velocity to improve future planning. The goal is to help you understand not just how story points work, but how all the planning pieces fit together inside an Agile team. Before we dive into story points and velocity, let's first look at the overall Agile planning flow. Everything usually starts with the product backlog. The backlog contains user stories representing desired functionality, improvements, fixes, or business needs. The product owner prioritizes these stories. From there, the team reviews candidate stories for upcoming work. The stories are discussed, clarified, and estimated. Once stories receive story point estimates, the team uses those estimates along with historical delivery data to determine how much work can realistically fit into a sprint. Then during the sprint, the team works on completing those stories according to the definition of done. At the end of the sprint, completed story points are used to calculate velocity. That velocity then becomes an input for future sprint planning and forecasting. Now let's zoom into what happens before estimation even begins. One of the biggest mistakes newer Agile teams make is trying to estimate stories before the work is fully understood. A story that is vague, incomplete, or poorly defined is difficult to estimate reliably. This is why teams spend time discussing backlog items before assigning story points. During backlog refinement, the team works together to better understand the story. They may ask questions like, do we fully understand the requirements? Are there external dependencies involved? Are there security or compliance concerns? Is the story too large for a sprint? Sometimes the discussion reveals that the story is much more complicated than originally expected. Other times, the team realizes the story still needs clarification before estimation can happen. This is completely normal in Agile environments. The goal is not to rush estimation. The goal is to build enough shared understanding that the team can estimate with reasonable confidence. Now let's talk about what Agile teams are actually estimating. When Agile teams estimate stories, they are usually not estimating exact hours or exact calendar duration. Instead, they evaluate the overall size and difficulty of the work. That evaluation often includes several factors combined together. The team may consider complexity, amount of work, uncertainty, dependencies, and risk. This is why story points are not simply coding effort. For example, 2 stories may require similar development effort, but 1 story may involve completely new technology or unclear requirements. Even if the coding effort is similar, the uncertainty is much higher. That story would typically receive a larger estimate. Story points represent overall effort and uncertainty combined, not simply the effort alone. This leads to the idea of relative estimation. Instead of asking, how many hours will this take? Agile teams usually ask, how difficult is this compared to other stories we already understand? Humans are generally much better at comparison than precise prediction. For example, if I ask you whether one object is heavier than another, you can probably answer quickly. But if I ask you the exact weight of each object, accuracy becomes much harder. Agile estimation works similarly. Teams compare stories relative to one another instead of trying to predict exact duration up front. This handles uncertainty much better, especially when requirements evolve or technical details are still emerging. Now let's look at some of the common estimation approaches Agile teams use. Different teams may use different methods depending on where they are in planning and how much information is available. One lightweight approach is t-shirt sizing. Stories may be categorized as small, medium, large, or extra large. This works well during early backlog refinement, when teams need quick, rough estimates before detailed discussions happen. The advantage is simplicity and speed. But because the categories are broad, t-shirt sizing is less useful for detailed sprint forecasting. Another much more common approach is story point estimation using the Fibonacci sequence. Typical values include 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 21. The increasing gaps between numbers are intentional. As work becomes larger, uncertainty increases significantly. Small stories are usually easier to estimate. Large stories contain more unknowns, assumptions, dependencies, and risk. The Fibonacci sequence reflects this growing uncertainty rather than pretending large work can be estimated with perfect precision. Some teams also use affinity estimation, where stories are grouped relative to one another based on size and complexity. For example, the team may place several stories on a wall or virtual board and quickly organize them into groups such as very small, small, medium, large, and very large. Or they may compare stories directly against each other by asking, is this smaller or larger than the login feature? This approach is useful when teams need to quickly estimate a large backlog without discussing every story in detail. And while some organizations still estimate using hours or days, many Agile teams avoid relying heavily on time-based estimation early because it often creates a false sense of precision. Now let's talk about how estimation usually starts in practice. Many Agile teams begin by establishing a baseline reference story. For example, the team may decide that a password reset feature represents a 3-point story. That story becomes an anchor story for future comparisons. As new stories are discussed, the team compares them against that baseline. They may ask, is this easier than the password reset feature, more complex or uncertain? This comparison-based approach helps teams estimate more consistently over time. And this is an important point to remember. Story points only make sense relative to other stories within the same team. One team's 5-point story may look very different from another team's 5-point story. That's completely normal. Story points are intended for internal team planning and forecasting, not cross-team comparison. Estimation in Agile is a team activity. The product owner may explain the story and clarify the business need, but the people doing the work should be involved in estimating it. That matters because different team members see different risks. A developer may notice technical complexity. A tester may see edge cases or quality concerns. An analyst may notice unclear requirements. The product owner may clarify value, priority, or acceptance criteria. A typical estimation conversation starts with the team reviewing the story. Then the team asks clarifying questions, discusses assumptions, identifies dependencies, and considers uncertainty. Once everyone has enough understanding, team members estimate independently. After estimates are revealed, the team discusses major differences. If one person estimates 3 points and another estimates 13 points, that gap is useful. It usually means someone sees complexity, risk, or uncertainty that others have not considered yet. This is why the estimation conversation is often more valuable than the final number. The goal is not just to assign points. The goal is to create shared understanding. Let's make this more practical. Assume the team has a baseline story. A password reset feature has already been estimated as 3 story points. The team understands this story well, so it becomes a reference point. Now the team looks at a new story. Update profile picture. After discussion, the team realizes this is a simple user interface update. The application already supports file uploads. There is no major integration work. Testing is straightforward. Compared to the password reset story, this feels smaller and lower risk. So the team estimates it as 2 story points. Now let's look at another story. Payment integration. This story involves an external payment gateway, error handling, security requirements, compliance concerns, and more complex testing. Compared to the password reset story, it is much more uncertain. Even if the team understands the general requirement, there are more dependencies and risks. So the team may estimate it as 13 story points. The important lesson is that story points are not just about coding time. They reflect effort, complexity, uncertainty, dependencies, and risk. Once stories are estimated, the team can use those estimates during sprint planning. The product owner brings the highest priority stories. The team looks at the estimates, discusses capacity, and decides how much work can realistically fit into the sprint. For example, the sprint backlog might include a login feature estimated at 5 points, a user profile page estimated at 5 points, notifications estimated at 8 points, and password reset estimated at 3 points. Together, that creates a sprint workload of 21 story points. But the team does not select work based only on the number. They also consider capacity, holidays, team availability, dependencies, risks, and the sprint goal. A team may have an average velocity of 25 points, but if 2 team members are out during the sprint, it may not be realistic to plan for 25 points. This is why sprint planning uses both velocity and capacity. Velocity tells the team what they have historically completed. Capacity tells the team what they can realistically handle in the current sprint. Now let's define velocity. Velocity measures how many story points the team actually completes during a sprint. If the team completes 18 points in Sprint 1, 20 points in Sprint 2, and 22 points in Sprint 3, their average velocity is around 20 story points per sprint. Velocity is based on completed work only. If a story is started but not completed according to the definition of done, it usually does not count toward velocity. This is important because velocity should reflect real delivery. It should not include partial credit for unfinished work. Velocity also emerges from actual delivery history. Teams do not arbitrarily decide their velocity up front. They discover it over time by completing work across multiple sprints. Once velocity becomes more stable, it can support forecasting. For example, suppose the remaining backlog has 100 story points. If the team's average velocity is 20 points per sprint, the rough forecast is about 5 more sprints. That does not mean the forecast is guaranteed. It simply gives the team and stakeholders a reasonable planning estimate based on actual delivery data. Forecasting improves as the team gains more history. If the team has only completed 1 sprint, velocity is still immature. If the team has completed several sprints with similar results, the forecast becomes more useful. Velocity helps teams plan realistically, but it should always be treated as a planning guide, not a promise. There are a few important clarifications about story points and velocity. First, story points are not hours. A 5-point story does not mean 5 hours or 5 days. It means the story is relatively larger or more complex than smaller stories. Second, velocity is team-specific. It depends on the team's experience, skill mix, technology, ways of working, and definition of done. Comparing velocity across teams is misleading. One team's 30 points may not mean they are more productive than another team's 15 points. They may simply estimate differently. Third, velocity is not a productivity score. It should support planning and forecasting. It should not be used to rank individuals or pressure teams to inflate estimates. When velocity becomes a performance target, teams may start gaming the numbers, and the metric becomes less useful. Finally, estimation improves over time. As teams complete more work together, they become more consistent. Their story point estimates become more stable. Their velocity becomes more predictable, and their forecasting improves. Let's quickly connect the full flow. The product backlog contains prioritized user stories. The team reviews candidate stories and clarifies requirements. The team estimates stories using relative sizing. Stories receive story point estimates based on effort, complexity, uncertainty, dependencies, and risk. During sprint planning, the team selects a realistic workload based on priority, velocity, and capacity. During the sprint, the team completes stories according to the definition of done. Completed story points create velocity. Velocity then helps the team forecast future delivery. The goal is better planning, better conversations, and continuous improvement. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe to PM Aspirant. And for more project management resources, visit pmaspirant.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.